Good morning, and welcome to the Stylo News Intelligence Update Explainer for June 12, 2026. I'm your host, and today we're focusing our attention on a critical and highly complex area, the Mediterranean Basin. We'll be bringing you a calm, purely fact-driven look at the intersecting migration, security, and geopolitical trends currently at play here. No hype, just the intelligence assessments to give you a clear, objective picture of the operating environment. Let's dive right in. This early morning briefing is brought to you by ProWave AI. They're the developers behind Stylo Intel, which is the AI-powered open-source intelligence program driving all the analysis you're about to see. And just a quick note, their commercial version, Stylo News, is available to you right now on the web and through their mobile apps, bringing you AI-powered news on demand. Okay, let's look at how we've organized today's intelligence briefing. We're breaking this down into 4 concise areas. First, a regional overview and patterns. Second, the impacts and policy actions. Third, intelligence and social sentiment. And finally, we'll wrap up with a strategic near-term outlook.
Starting right in with Section 1, Regional Overview and Patterns. We're going to map out the geographic and strategic realities shaping the basin right now.
To truly understand the Mediterranean operating theater today, you have to look at how it's being compressed by 3 converging zones of instability. Think of it almost like a geopolitical pressure cooker. Up to the northeast, the Black Sea area is highly volatile, driven by Russian hybrid activity and the ongoing spillover from Ukraine. Over in the east, you have the Middle East conflicts, specifically involving Israel, Lebanon, and Iranian-aligned actors projecting risk outward. And then to the south, there's this chronic, systemic instability across North Africa. The Mediterranean Sea sits squarely in the crosshairs of all 3 of these pressure systems. Now, if we focus strictly on that southern flank, the intelligence data points to Libya as the primary permissive node for regional instability. Governance there remains highly fragmented among competing militias. For example, in western coastal hubs like Al-Zawiya, public protests have recently erupted over severe insecurity and illicit fuel smuggling. Because there's a lack of centralized state control, we're seeing highly active transit corridors open up in the south. Specifically, down near the Fezzan region and the Niger border, extremist elements and smuggling networks are actively pushing north from the Sahel right toward the Mediterranean coast. Moving on to Section 2, Impacts and Policy Actions. Let's look at how these structural pressures are actively affecting populations and governments. The data really shows us how these broad pressures are creating immediate, tangible impacts across multiple levels. Locally, coastal towns in Italy, Malta, and Greece are facing severe logistical strain from maritime rescue operations, while at the same time, Libyan citizens in Al-Zawiya are protesting militia violence. Zooming out to the national level, we're tracking shifting border postures. For instance, Italy and the Netherlands just formed a bilateral pact to manage asylum flows. Meanwhile, Romania is dealing with drone incursions in its airspace as those Black Sea tensions spill over. And internationally, it's highly active. The EU is pushing forward with third-country return center agreements, NATO is running its Baltops naval drills, and the EU is using Operation Irini to enforce maritime arms embargoes against Russian shadow fleets. But against all of this policy movement, we've spotted a pretty surprising operational shift in the data. Early June statistics show a sharp 50% drop in migrant arrivals to Italy departing from Libya. However, that major decrease in the central Mediterranean is directly offset by a rapid surge in irregular arrivals on the eastern route, specifically heading toward the southern coast and islands of Greece. It's a classic displacement effect. While enforcement might disrupt one specific corridor, the underlying migration pressure is simply rerouting to another. Naturally, decision-makers have very distinct perspectives on how to handle these shifting pressures. On one hand, the European Union and agencies like Frontex are maintaining a strong focus on externalizing border management. They're partnering with transit countries like Libya and Tunisia to disrupt departures and enforce the Dublin Convention's rules. On the other hand, regional analysts like Bashir al-Juwani advise against this approach. They argue that current EU policies lack equitable burden sharing, put disproportionate strain on southern Mediterranean countries, and risk sidelining humanitarian principles by outsourcing control to fractured states. We report both of these perspectives so you have the full, balanced picture of the current policy debate. That brings us to Section 3, Intelligence and Social Sentiment. Let's examine the public consensus and where the friction points are across the region. When we synthesize the prevailing social sentiment from open-source intelligence, 4 clear themes emerge. First, there's a deep, persistent public frustration over the long-term governance failures and instability in Libya ever since the 2011 interventions. Second,
We're seeing notable support among European citizens for those joint NATO and EU maritime operations, which are largely viewed as a necessary deterrence against Black Sea spillover. On the flip side, there is sharp concern regarding regional military posturing, especially regarding recent incidents involving Turkish F-16s interacting with EU ministers in the Eastern Mediterranean. And finally, we're measuring a healthy amount of public suspicion and debate surrounding the broader militarization of the region, specifically regarding the expansion and use of military bases like Sigonella in Italy.
And that heightened public vigilance makes a lot of sense when you look at the Eastern Mediterranean strategic environment right now. Our open-source tracking shows significantly higher risks to global maritime shipping in this sector. Activities by Iranian and Houthi actors in nearby waterways are creating direct downstream effects in the Mediterranean. Practically speaking, this translates to increased commercial shipping insurance rates, disruptions to energy flows, and the need for enhanced naval tasking by NATO and partner nations just to protect these vital sea lanes.
Finally, let's turn to Section 4, Strategic Near-Term Outlook. These are the likely events and catalysts you'll want to monitor moving forward.
Looking ahead, the summer of 2026 represents the historical peak season for Mediterranean migration attempts, so local maritime resources will certainly be tested. Right around mid-2026, we'll see the formal implementation of the new EU asylum and deportation rules, which could significantly reshape regional enforcement. Now for a brief, fascinating departure from geopolitics. On August 12, 2026, Southern Europe, and particularly the Varese region of Italy, is going to experience a partial solar eclipse, an event drawing a lot of scientific and public attention. But returning to policy, late 2026 is going to feature some very crucial bilateral cooperation meetings between Italy and Turkey, aimed specifically at addressing trafficking networks and overall regional stability.
So, as we wrap up the analytical portion of today's explainer, we want to leave you with a central, forward-looking question drawn straight from the intelligence. Will these newly implemented diplomatic frameworks, things like the EU border pacts and bilateral meetings, actually be able to outpace the deeply entrenched structural drivers of regional instability found in fragmented states like Libya? The data suggests this is going to be the defining race for Mediterranean security over the coming months. Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer of the Mediterranean Operating Theater. Remember, this program is just a brief lead-in to our comprehensive reporting. For a much deeper analysis covering 2 full weeks of regional events, we highly encourage you to listen to the full Stylo News Intel Update Morning podcast on your favorite channel, or just follow the link provided in this post. And of course, make sure to visit stylonews.com, where you can get all of our AI-powered news on demand. I'm your host, wishing you a clear, informed, and objective day.